There is a specific kind of silence that falls right before a whole room decides to laugh at you, and I know exactly what it sounds like. I was 19 years old, standing in a courtyard full of people, and the three most powerful boys in school had just decided, out loud in front of everyone, that I was nothing. What they didn't know was that nothing is exactly where the most dangerous things grow from. You know that feeling when someone underestimates you so badly it almost becomes fuel? Yeah, we're about to live inside that feeling together. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single second of this. I didn't even want to be there that morning. The school courtyard was loud the way it always got before first period, everyone talking over everyone else, bags swinging, people showing off new shoes or new rumors. I was just trying to get to class without my crutch catching on the uneven ground near the fountain. That fountain had been broken for 2 years, by the way. Nobody fixed it because nobody important enough ever walked past it. I did, though, every single day. My name is Callum Fade, a scholarship student at Hargrove Academy, the kind of school where even the air seemed to know it cost money to breathe. I had one good leg, one that had never healed right after the accident when I was 12, and a limp that announced me before I even entered a room. I wasn't ashamed of it. Well, not most days, but some days it felt like wearing a sign that said Target. That particular morning, I was almost at the main building when I heard it. "Hey, crutch boy." I didn't stop walking. That was the rule I'd made for myself. Don't stop, don't look, don't give them anything to work with. But the voice came again, louder this time, and then a third joined it. All three of them, perfectly in sync the way they always were, like they'd rehearsed it. The Hargrove triplets. Zane, Colt, and Reed Hargrove. 19 years old, same as me, same class even, but that was where the similarities ended and the universe split into two completely different worlds. Theirs and mine. They were tall in that way that made you feel smaller just standing near them. All three of them had the same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same way of holding themselves like the ground owed them something for being walked on. They ran half the school's underground dealings. Nobody said it out loud, but everybody knew. Their father was the kind of man whose name made teachers go quiet mid-sentence, and the three of them together, they were the kind of people that even other alphas stepped aside for. Zane was the one who'd spoken first. He always did. He had this half-smile that never quite reached his eyes, and he used it now as he fell into step behind me with his brothers flanking him like shadows. "I'm talking to you," he said, easy and relaxed, the way someone talks when they already know they've won. I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. Every other time I'd kept moving and it had been fine. Annoying, but fine. But something about that morning, maybe the way the whole courtyard had gone weirdly quiet around us, made my feet just stop. I turned around slowly. The entire courtyard was watching. I registered that in pieces, faces turning, conversations dying, someone near the steps pulling out a phone. That last part made something cold settle in my stomach. Colt was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking almost bored. Reed was slightly behind his brothers, but his eyes were sharper than theirs. Reed always noticed things. And Zane was standing right in front of me now, close enough that I had to tip my chin up a little to meet his gaze. "You dropped something," Zane said, pleasantly. I looked down instinctively. There was nothing on the ground. When I looked back up, he was smiling wider. "Your dignity," he said. "Oh wait, you never had any." Laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough people. Scattered at first, then spreading, the way fire does when there's wind. I felt my grip tighten on my crutch. My jaw locked up the way it did when I was trying very hard not to show something on my face. "You think this school doesn't see you?" Zane continued, his voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. He had the kind of voice made for rooms. Scholarship kid, no wolf, dragging himself around on a stick, and somehow, you walk around like you belong here. "He doesn't, though," Colt said from the wall, unhelpfully. 3 weeks after the courtyard incident, the video had 6,000 views. 6,000 at a school with barely 800 students. It had spread the way those things always do. Someone shared it, someone else shared their share, and before long it was just everywhere. I heard about it from the librarian of all people, Mrs. Margaret, who pulled me aside after school one Thursday and asked me, very gently, if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She gave me the kind of look that said she knew I wasn't, but she also knew that wasn't what I wanted to talk about, so she just squeezed my shoulder once and let me go. The video was the worst part, somehow worse than the moment itself, because the moment had been real and immediate and survivable, but the video was permanent. It lived in the space where people could pause it, rewind it, watch my face go through those 2 seconds of nothing over and over again. I'd been frozen into something for strangers to pick apart, and I had no say in it. Zane, Colt, and Reed had, of course, said nothing. No apology, no acknowledgement, not that I expected one. They moved through the school the way they always had, like the whole place was a lounge they owned. People fell over themselves around them. Teachers smiled carefully at them. Even the other alphas gave them space, because the Hargrove name meant something in this city that went far beyond school grounds. I watched them sometimes, not out of obsession, but out of this careful, quiet habit of paying attention. I noticed things. The way Reed always seemed slightly separate from his brothers, even when he was standing right beside them. How his eyes moved around a room like he was cataloging it. The way, sometimes, when Zane said something particularly cutting, Reed's jaw would shift just barely, not in agreement, in something closer to discomfort. I filed that away. I didn't know why yet, but I filed it. My grades, in the meantime, were doing something my hurt feelings weren't. They were thriving. I had always been good at school, but that semester I became exceptional. I poured everything into it. Every hour I wasn't limping through hallways or eating alone on a roof, I was reading, writing, calculating. Not to impress anyone, not for revenge, not yet anyway, but because it was the one place I had complete control, and control felt like the most important thing in the world right then. My scholarship counselor, a sharp woman named Dr. Maddie, called me in one October afternoon and looked at my latest scores with an expression I hadn't seen from an adult in a long time. She looked proud. "Callum," she said, setting the papers down, "do you know about the Alderton Research Fellowship?" I didn't. It's awarded every 2 years to one student from any accredited secondary institution in the region, she said. The selection is done externally. No school politics, no favoritism, pure merit. It comes with a full-ride scholarship to any university you choose, a stipend, and, most significantly, a guaranteed research position at Alderton Labs for the 2 summers before graduation. I stared at her. "You want me to apply," I said. "You want me to win," she said simply. That was the moment things shifted. Not dramatically, still no drums, still no lightning, but something in the shape of the future changed that afternoon, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. I started working for the fellowship the next day. November brought cold mornings and shorter afternoons, and Hargrove Academy's annual hierarchy gala, which was exactly as pretentious as it sounded. The gala was a school tradition going back decades, originally designed to celebrate outstanding students, but practically functioning as a showcase for whoever had the most money and the highest pack rank. Every year, the top families came in their best clothes, the alphas got introduced like they were being presented to royalty, and the rest of us basically served as background decoration. I was going because Dr. Maddie had submitted my name as a scholarship academic nominee, which meant I had to attend and stand on the stage for approximately 4 minutes while someone read out my GPA. I ironed my one good shirt the night before. I polished my crutch handles. My mum cried a little, which she pretended was from the onions she was cutting for dinner. The gala was held in the school's grand hall, a massive room that the rest of the year functioned as a gymnasium, but could be transformed into something almost regal with enough decorations and the right lighting. I arrived early because I needed extra time to navigate the crowd, and I stood near the sidewall with a glass of water, watching the room fill up. The Hargrove family arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. Their father walked in first, a tall, broad man with the kind of stillness that made rooms quieter. Their mother, elegant and entirely unreachable. And then the 3 of them, Zane, Colt, and Reed, in dark suits, looking exactly like what they were, the kind of people born into rooms like this. I watched them work the crowd. Zane was natural at it, shaking hands and smiling the real version of his smile, the one he used on people who mattered to him. Colt stayed close to his father, attentive and focused. Reed's eyes found me almost immediately. I don't know how, the room was full, but they did, and for one brief second we just looked at each other across the space of it. No hostility in his expression, which surprised me. No contempt, just looking, like he was trying to read something. Then someone touched his arm and he turned away, and I told myself it hadn't meant anything. The ceremony started, names were called. I climbed the steps to the stage carefully, which took concentration, and I stood at the podium while the vice principal read out my academic achievements. The applause was polite and sparse. I smiled at the audience and meant none of it. But then, and I still don't quite know why this happened, I looked directly at Zane. He was watching me from the third row. His expression was unreadable, which was unusual for him. Usually there was always something working in his face. Amusement, calculation, satisfaction. But right then, looking up at me on the stage, there was just nothing. Or maybe it was something I didn't have a word for yet. The moment passed. I stepped down from the stage, went back to my wall, and finished my water. An hour later, I was putting on my coat to leave when someone stopped beside me. That was a good score. The GPA. Honestly impressive. I turned around. It was Reed. Up close, he looked almost different than he did from across a room, less like a piece of a matching set and more like an individual person. He had a small scar near his left eyebrow I'd never noticed before. His hands were in his pockets, and his posture was slightly less polished than usual, like he'd let something down. I looked at him for a long moment. "Is this a joke?" I asked finally. He flinched just slightly. "No," he said quietly. "Because you and your brothers already had their fun," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "The whole school saw it. 6,000 people online saw it. So if this is the next part of something—" "It's not," he said. He met my eyes. "I know that doesn't mean much, coming from me. I know." A pause, and then quietly, "I didn't say anything that day. That was a choice I made, and it was the wrong one. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I just wanted to say it." I didn't know what to do with that. It didn't fit anything I'd prepared for. "Okay," I said finally, because I didn't have anything better. He nodded once, like that was fair, and walked away. I stood there for a second, replaying the exchange in my head, trying to figure out where to put it. I couldn't, so I went home and worked on my fellowship application for 3 hours, and somewhere around midnight I realized I was thinking about the scar near his eyebrow more than I was thinking about the application. I closed my notes, told myself firmly that this was irrelevant, and went to sleep. December arrived, and with it 2 things: my completed fellowship application and the beginning of something I hadn't planned for. Reed Hargrove started sitting near me in the library. Not at my table, not right beside me, just nearby. Close enough that I was aware of him, far enough that it could have been coincidence. The first time I thought it was coincidence. The second time I thought it was strange. The third time I looked up from my book and said, "You can just sit here if you want. I don't care." He looked up from whatever he was reading, something about environmental law, which was the last thing I'd expected. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, thanks." He moved one table closer. We didn't really talk that day, or the next, but there was something about studying near someone in silence, a kind of gradual understanding that built up without words, the way a fire starts from heat before there's any flame. I started noticing his patterns. He annotated everything. He drummed his fingers when he was thinking hard and stopped when he'd figured something out. He brought the same type of tea every time in a travel cup that was dented on one side.
One evening in mid-December, we were both working late and the library was nearly empty, and he said, without looking up from his notes, "Do you actually want to win that fellowship, or do you just want to prove something?" I looked up. "Both," I said after a moment. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said, and then slowly, like he was admitting something, "I think wanting to prove something is actually the better fuel. It lasts longer." "What are you trying to prove?" I asked before I could stop myself. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "That I'm not just the third one," he said finally, low and careful. "That I'm not just Zane's echo." There it was, the thing I'd been filing away since September, the slight jaw shift, the separate eyes, the Zane's echo. I looked at him properly for the first time, I think, not as one of three, not as part of the thing that had humiliated me, but as a person sitting across a table from me at 9:30 at night, saying something honest into the library quiet. "You're not," I said, and I meant it. He looked up. Something moved in his face, quick and surprised, like he hadn't expected that, like he wasn't used to being seen separately. "You barely know me," he said carefully. "I know," I said, "but I watch people. It's kind of all I've had to do since September." That landed. I saw it land. He looked down at his notes, and his jaw moved in a way that wasn't the slight discomfort move. It was something closer to guilt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much." "Stop apologizing," I said, not harshly, just honestly. "It happened. I can't unknow what kind of people you all are because of one apology." "Fair," he said. Another pause. "But I'd like to try to be different to you than I've been." I looked at him for a long time. "Okay," I said again. Same word as at the gala, but it felt different this time. It felt like the beginning of something. I just didn't know yet whether that something was going to be beautiful or devastating. January was when I won the fellowship. Dr. Maddie called me into her office on a Thursday morning and told me before she even finished closing the door. Her voice cracked on the last word of the announcement, which she immediately covered by coughing and adjusting her glasses, but I saw it and I loved her for it. I sat down because my legs suddenly felt like it wouldn't hold me. "Full ride," she said. "Any university you choose, Callum. Anyone." I nodded. I couldn't talk yet. "And there will be an announcement at school. The Alderton people always do a formal presentation. It'll be in front of the whole school." I thought about the courtyard, the fountain, 6,000 views. "Good," I said quietly. Reed found out before the announcement. I don't know how, maybe through Dr. Maddie's office, maybe the school grapevine, but he appeared beside me in the east corridor on Wednesday morning with this expression that was almost shy and entirely unexpected. "I heard about the fellowship," he said. "Already?" "My mom is on the school board," he said, slightly apologetic. "She mentioned it at dinner." I almost laughed at that. Of course she is. "Callum," he stopped, started again. "Congratulations. I genuinely mean that. It's a huge deal." "I know," I said. And then, because something about the way he said my name, really said my name, not Crutch Boy, not Scholarship Kid, just Callum, made something warm settle in my chest. "Thank you." We'd been getting somewhere since December. I was careful about calling it what it felt like, careful in the way you are when the ground is unfamiliar and you're walking with a crutch on an uneven surface. But the truth was that over those weeks of library evenings and careful silences and the occasional conversation that ran longer than expected, something had shifted between us. He'd started texting me sometimes. Nothing significant, a question about a concept from our shared class, a funny thing he'd seen, once a photograph of an unusually shaped cloud that he said reminded him of something we'd been talking about. I texted back. Gradually, those texts started carrying more weight, the way conversations do when they start meaning something to both people involved. He had opinions, strong ones actually, that he kept carefully contained around his brothers. He cared about things, the environment, genuinely, not performatively. He read widely. He was funny in a dry, understated way that only landed if you were paying attention, which I always was.
And he was thoughtful, the kind of thoughtful that showed up in small ways, like remembering that I took longer on stairs and falling behind to walk at my pace without making it obvious that he was doing it. I noticed all of it. My heart noticed it too, against my better judgment. The Alderton announcement happened on a Friday afternoon in the main hall. The whole school was gathered. Mandatory attendance. Dr. Maddie had arranged it that way. The Alderton representative was a crisp, efficient woman named Dr. Payne, who gave a brief overview of the fellowship and then said my name into the microphone in a hall full of 800 people. I walked to the front. Slow, the way I always walked. Crutch, step, the whole hall watching. And the thing that happened next, I wasn't expecting it. Someone started clapping. Not polite, scattered applause, real clapping, the kind that builds. It started near the back left section and rolled forward like a wave, and by the time I reached the podium, it was most of the hall. I stood at the microphone and looked out at all those faces. I found Zane first. He was sitting in the second row, perfectly still, not clapping. His expression was something I hadn't seen him before, something that took me a moment to identify as genuine surprise. Like he'd looked at me and finally processed that I was a real person who had done a real thing. Colt, beside him, was clapping. Slowly, sort of mechanically, the way you do when you're doing it because everyone else is. And Reed was standing up. He was the only one in his section who was standing. He wasn't looking at his brothers or calculating the room. He was looking at me, and he was clapping, and the expression on his face was... it was proud. Like I was someone he'd known was capable of this all along. Like watching me stand at that podium was something he'd been quietly hoping for. I looked away before it could do too much to me. I said a few words. Thank you. Hard work. Grateful. The usual. I kept it short. And then I walked back to my seat, and the hall settled back into its normal hum, and I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince my heart to be sensible. It wasn't listening. February arrived, and with it, the thing I hadn't expected. Reed asked me to walk with him after school one Thursday. Not a library session, not a text conversation, an actual come walk with me, which he said while leaning against my locker and looking at the floor in a way that suggested the words were harder to say than they should have been. I looked at him for a moment. Just walking? Just walking, he agreed. So we walked. Through the school grounds, out through the side gate, along the path that ran beside the old playing fields where the grass was just starting to come back from winter. My crutch made a soft rhythm on the path, and he matched his pace to mine the way he always did, easily, like it was just how he walked. We talked about everything and nothing, about the fellowship, about what university I might choose, about his family, careful fragments like he was selecting what to share, about music, about the weird, specific sadness of finishing a book you loved. And then, he said, out of nowhere, his eyes still on the path ahead, I think I've been waiting for an excuse to do this for a while. I kept walking. Do what? Just be near you, he said quietly, without it being about studying or the library or, I don't know, I think I just wanted to see if it felt like what I thought it did. I slowed to a stop. He stopped too and turned to look at me properly. Reed, I said carefully. My heart was doing something genuinely inconvenient. You know I can't just forget the context of this. I know, he said immediately. You were there. You didn't say anything. I know, he said again, steadier this time, like he'd made peace with carrying that. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you to let me be better with you, to you, because I want to, not because I feel guilty, though I do feel guilty, Cal. I want you to know that, genuinely. But because this has been the most honest I've felt around anyone in a long time. I looked at him. The late afternoon light was doing something specific to his face, making it look less curated, more real. The scar near his eyebrow, the slight, uncertain set of his mouth. I'm not going to make this easy, I said, finally. I'm not asking for easy, he said. Something in my chest made a decision that my head immediately registered alarm about. But I said, quietly, okay, then let's keep walking. And we did. Those next few weeks were, there's no other word for it, they were something. Morning texts, library evenings with occasional shared snacks, walking the playing fields path on Thursdays, always like it became a thing we had without announcing it. He made me laugh in ways I hadn't in months. He remembered small things I mentioned and came back to them later. He looked at me like I was worth looking at. And I was falling a little, maybe more than a little. It was the specific kind of falling that feels like stupidity and wonder at the same time, the kind you know is changing the shape of your days without your permission. But underneath it, very quietly, something kept nudging me. You don't know the whole picture, Callum. You don't know the whole picture yet. March was when the picture changed. Reed and I were in the library when Zane walked in. He didn't come in often. Zane wasn't a library kind of person generally, but he came in that afternoon, and he stood at the end of our table and looked between us with an expression that was very still. "Reed," he said. Just that. Reed went still beside me, a different kind of still from how he usually went still. "Give me a minute," Reed said quietly. "Now," Zane said. And Reed, my Reed, the one who'd stood up in the hall, who walked at my pace, who said you're worth being honest with, got up without a word and followed his brother out of the library. I sat at the table with my book open and the words not making any sense, listening to the silence they left behind. He came back 20 minutes later. He sat down. He didn't say anything. "What did he want?" I asked, keeping my voice even. A pause, long enough to be its own answer. "Reed." "He just wanted to talk," Reed said, quietly. "About what?" Another pause. When he spoke, his voice had changed slightly, like something had compressed inside it. "About me spending time with you." I looked at him. "And you?" I asked carefully. His jaw moved. "I'm not Zane," he said. "That's not an answer." "I know," he said. And there it was again, that caught between things quality I'd noticed in him since September. The person who wanted to be separate from his brothers and didn't quite know how to do it yet. I closed my book carefully. "I'm going to need you to know what you want, not what Zane wants, not what the family wants, what you want, because I can't—" I stopped, took a breath. "I've already had enough of people treating me like I'm something to be embarrassed about. I won't do it again." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were complicated, full of something he hadn't figured out how to say yet. "Give me some time," he said quietly. I nodded once, and I went back to my book, even though the words still weren't making sense, and I told myself very firmly that I was not going to build a home in the uncertainty of another person's decision. I told myself that. I didn't quite believe it. Loving someone and still having to walk away from them, that's one of the pliantest, heaviest things a person can do. Subscribe because Callum is about to make that exact decision, and it will sit with you for days. March arrived without resolution. Reed and I were still in the library on Thursdays. We still studied in the library. The texts were still coming. Maybe slightly less frequently, maybe with slightly longer gaps, maybe with something slightly careful about them that hadn't been there before. But they came, and I answered them, because I was apparently someone who didn't learn things the easy way. But I was paying attention, and what I noticed through all of it was that Reed never quite said the thing. He never resolved the question I'd asked him in the library. He was present in the way someone is when they genuinely care. He was warmer, more thoughtful, more real than almost anyone I'd known. But there was this other layer underneath everything, something that kept his life in two separate columns that didn't quite connect, the column where he was with me and the column where he was a Hargrove. I understood it, I think. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It was Zane who changed things. Or rather, it was Zane's birthday celebration that did it. The Hargrove triplets' birthday fell on the 15th of April, and every year the family threw something large. This year it was a private venue event for the school's upper social tier, which did not include me, obviously, except that Reed had, quietly, almost nervously, mentioned it to me 2 days before and said he wanted me there. "Your brothers won't want me there," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking you anyway." I should have said no. Looking back, I should have said no. But he was looking at me with that particular look he had, the one that was equal parts genuine and searching, like he was asking whether I trusted him. And I said yes. So I went. The venue was a rooftop space in the city. Beautiful, actually, in the way that expensive things sometimes genuinely are. The city lights spread out below, warm lighting, music that was good rather than just loud. I was overdressed in my one good jacket, and I knew it, but I held my crutch like I owned it, and I walked in. Reed found me within minutes, which meant he'd been watching for me, which did something persistent to my chest. For about an hour, it was good, actually. We stood by the railing, looking at the city, talking in the easy, low-key way that had become natural between us. He brought me a drink without asking what I wanted, which was fine because he'd already figured out what I liked. He touched the back of my hand once, briefly, and when I looked at him, he looked back steadily. But Zane had seen me arrive. I became aware of it gradually, the way the energy in Reed's posture shifted slightly, the way Colt's eyes tracked us from across the room, the way eventually Zane finished whatever conversation he was in and started moving in our direction with the particular casual purpose that meant something was coming. He reached us and stood beside Reed, his back to the city, and looked at me with an expression that was almost sociable, except for the thing underneath it. "Callum," he said, pleasant, careful. "Zane," I said. "Didn't know you'd be here." His eyes moved briefly to Reed. Not an accusation, exactly, more like a note being taken. "Reed invited me," I said, evenly. "Right." A small pause, and then, still pleasant, still careful, "You know, I've been thinking about you since the fellowship announcement." He tilted his head slightly. "Really impressive, honestly. You've worked hard to get where you are." A pause that was too brief. "Given everything." Given everything. 2 words. The whole courtyard, 6,000 views, you're just nothing, packed into 2 words. I looked at him for a moment. "Given what?" I asked, quiet, clear. Something moved in his face. Not quite discomfort, more like recalibration. He wasn't used to being asked to say things plainly. Beside him, Reed was very still. "Given that you've had it harder than most people here," Zane said, smooth and unreadable. "You mean because I was wolfless and poor and you mocked me in front of the school?" The railing group nearest had gone quiet. Zane's expression shifted, something that might have been the first genuine discomfort I'd ever seen cross his face. "That's," he started. "I'm not angry about it," I said, calmly, and the strange thing was, in that moment, I genuinely wasn't. I was something colder and clearer than angry. I've actually stopped being angry about it. But I need you to understand that those words you said, you don't get to dress them up now, Zane. They were what they were." Zane looked at me, and then he looked at Reed, and in the space of that look, everything changed. Because Reed didn't move. He didn't step in front of me or touch my arm or do any of the small defending things I'd seen him start to do over the past months. He stood very still, looking at his brother, and something passed between them that I couldn't fully read, but that settled in my stomach like a stone. "Reed," I said, quietly. He looked at me. His eyes were the ones I knew, complicated, genuine, searching, but they were also the eyes of someone standing in a room that he'd always belonged to more than he'd admitted. He started. "It's fine," I said, because it was. Not fine like good, fine like I understood, like I'd known underneath everything that this moment would come. "Go enjoy your birthday." "Reed," I said, quietly, still clear. Genuinely. I put my glass down on the railing, picked up my crutch, and left. I took the elevator down because stairs were not an option with my leg and the particular exhaustion of that evening. I stood in the elevator and looked at my reflection in its mirrored wall. 19 years old. 1 good jacket, a crutch, and a heart that had managed to put itself in a position it had been warned about. The lobby was cool and empty. I walked through it and out into the night. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I thought I might, but I didn't. What I felt was something older and quieter than crying, more like recognition, like a part of me had always known this was how it would resolve, and the rest of me had just taken a while to catch up. I walked to the bus stop and sat on the bench and looked at the city going about its night, all those lights and movements and lives happening without knowing about mine, and I thought, okay. Here is what I have. A fellowship, a full ride to any university I want, a mother who is proud of me, a crutch that's been with me since I was 12, and every single version of myself that has survived getting here. That is enough. It is going to have to be enough. I didn't hear from Reed for 2 weeks after that. I filled those weeks with preparations. The fellowship required a formal final selection interview in May, and I spent my evenings working through every possible question, every angle, every presentation of my research proposal. Dr. Maddie drilled me twice a week. My proposal on adaptive mobility technology, specifically for individuals with physical disabilities who existed in shift-reliant communities where their differences were used against them, was, according to 2 external reviewers, exceptional. I poured everything into it. All the things I couldn't say out loud. All the things I'd been building in the quiet. 2 weeks and 3 days after the birthday event, a text came. I handled that night wrong. I know that. I've been trying to figure out how to say what I want to say, and I keep not being able to get it right. Can I see you? I read it 3 times. I put my phone down. I picked it up again. Library tomorrow, I typed. The usual time. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at what had become our table. He'd started calling it that, casually, our table, and I'd left him without comment. He had his travel cup with the dent and his annotated notes and his hands folded on the table in a way that said he was nervous. I need to say something first, I said, sitting down. He nodded. I'm not going to hold what happened at the party against you, but I need you to understand I have been someone's secret before. Not romantically, but I have been the version of myself that someone was embarrassed by. I know what that feels like, and I won't be again. Not for you, not for anyone. You're not a secret, he said immediately. His voice had an urgency to it. Cal, you have never been a secret. He stopped, took a breath. I froze. Zane was there, and I froze, and that was my failure. It wasn't about you. It was about the part of me that hasn't fully figured out how to be in a room with my family and also be the person I am when I'm with you. I looked at him. Which person are you when you're with me? I asked. Someone who actually says what he thinks, he quieted. Someone who sees people for what they are instead of what's useful about them. A pause. Someone who stood up in an assembly hall and didn't care who saw. That landed. I care about you, he said, direct, no decoration. I'm sorry I didn't show that better that night. I'm asking you to... He stopped again. I'm just... asking. I was quiet for a long moment. And here is the thing about being young and having been hurt. You learn eventually that you can understand someone completely and still choose yourself. That grace is real and forgiveness is real, but some things, once they show you their shape, don't unshow it. I knew Reed. I believed he meant what he was saying. I believed he was a better person than that birthday party moment. I believed all of it. But something else had also happened in those 2 weeks, something I need to tell you about because it matters to what comes next. His name was Solomon Addo.
He'd come up at the Regional Fellowship Reception in late April, an external event where this year's recipients from different schools gathered for an introduction. He was from school across the city, also on scholarship, a tall, quiet alpha who worked in conservation biology and had this way of saying things that made you think he'd been carrying them around for a while before deciding they were ready. We'd been introduced by Dr. Payne. We'd ended up talking for 2 hours in a corner of the reception room while everyone else did networking. He'd laughed at something I said in a surprised, genuine way, like he hadn't expected to laugh but couldn't help it. At the end of the evening, he'd said, very simply, I'd like to know you better, if that's something you'd be open to. And I'd felt, not the complicated, layered, cautious thing I felt around Reed, something different, something that felt like fresh air. I told him I was open to it. So when Reed sat across from me in the library and asked me, quietly, to give him another chance, I looked at him and I felt the full weight of everything we'd been to each other over these months, and I also held, very quietly, the knowledge of that reception evening and a tall conservation biology alpha who'd looked at me like I was interesting and wonderful without any history attached to it. I care about you too, I said to Reed honestly, but I think we're not in the same place, and I think you need more time to figure out who you are outside of your family,
before you can fully be who I'd need you to be." His face did something that was hard to look at. "Is there someone else?" he asked, very quiet. "There might be," I said, "but this isn't about that. This is about us." He nodded slowly. The movement was careful, like he was holding something fragile. "I understand," he said finally, low, like it cost him. "I think you're going to be remarkable," I said, and I meant it. "When you figure it out." He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were bright in that specific way that had nothing to do with crying and everything to do with knowing something has ended. "So are you," he said. "You already are." I gathered my things and stood up. He didn't move. I walked to the library door and stopped once, just once, because I am a person and not a machine, and looked back. He was still sitting there, hands flat on the table, looking at the space where I'd been. I turned and walked out. May arrived in full color. The fellowship interview was on a Thursday morning, and I dressed in the same jacket I'd worn to the birthday party, which was either a choice or a coincidence depending on how symbolic you wanted to be about it. Dr. Maddie straightened my collar before I went in and told me she was proud of me regardless of the outcome, which she said the way people say things when they already know the outcome but want to be decent about it. The interview lasted 90 minutes. It went well, better than well. The panel asked sharp questions, and I had sharper answers. And at one point, Dr. Payne, the Alderton representative, leaned forward and said, "Tell me more about the personal element of this research." And I told her. All of it. The accident, the school, what wolflessness meant in a world that ranked you by your animal, what it felt like to be mocked for the thing your body was, how that had become fuel, and then direction, and eventually a research question that I thought could change things for people like me. The room was quiet when I finished. Dr. Payne made a note. I found out 2 days later that I'd been formally confirmed as the Alderton Fellow, full ride to my chosen university, a research position, and, something Dr. Payne mentioned almost casually at the end of the confirmation call, a feature in the Alderton Foundation's public journal, which had a readership of about 400,000 people. The article ran in June with a photograph of me and my crutch and a headline that said simply, "From Scholarship to Fellowship, How Callum Fade is Redefining What Belonging Means." My mother kept a printed copy on the kitchen wall for the rest of the year. End of term arrived, and with it the last Hargrove Academy Assembly of the year. It was a send-off ceremony for final year students, the graduating class, the ones who were moving on. We weren't graduating yet, not technically, but the school liked its rituals, and so there was an assembly, and there were speeches, and there were acknowledgments. The headmaster mentioned the fellowship, at length. He said my name twice, the second time with something in his voice that hadn't been there last year, a recognition that was different from the polite applause recognition of the gala. This was the real kind, the kind that stuck. I sat in the back of the hall and let it settle over me. And then I looked at the front rows where the Hargrove brothers sat with the other prominent families, and I allowed myself one moment of honest inventory. Zane was sitting straight-backed and attentive, the way he always did in public spaces, performing perfect son. But something about his posture, just slightly, looked like a person who had encountered something that had reorganized their understanding of the world without them quite catching up to it. He'd looked that way at the fellowship announcement. He looked that way now. I didn't feel satisfaction about it, exactly. I felt something quieter, more complete. Colt was checking his phone under the seat. Colt was always going to be Colt. And Reed turned around at that moment, like he felt the looking, and our eyes met across the hall. He didn't smile. I didn't either. We just looked at each other. The full length of a school year, the library table, the playing fields, the birthday party, the last library conversation, all of it there between us, held briefly in a glance. Then he nodded, once. Small. Honest. I nodded back. That was enough. 3 days before term officially ended, I was on the east building roof, my roof, the one no one else used, when I heard someone coming up the access stairs. I turned around, expecting nobody. It was Zane. He came up through the door and stopped when he saw me, and for a moment we both just stood there looking at each other in the early summer light. He was alone, which was unusual for him. He looked slightly less polished than normal, jacket off, sleeves not quite rolled evenly, the version of him that existed when the performance wasn't running at full power. "This your spot?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He looked around at the view, the city, the low afternoon sun, the broken fountain 3 floors below. "I come up here sometimes too, different stairs. I didn't know you were ever here." "Nobody does," I said. "That's the point." He stood there for a second that stretched long enough to mean something. Then he moved to lean against the railing about 6 feet away from me. Not close, not intrusive, just present. Neither of us said anything for a while. "I watched your interview write-up, the journal article." I looked at him. The bit about what it felt like, being wolfless in a school like this, he paused, being treated like nothing. He was looking at the city, not at me. I've been thinking about it since it came out, about that day in the courtyard. I waited. "I could give you reasons," he said slowly, "that I was being what I was trained to be, that I didn't think of you as a person, which sounds terrible but is honest, that I was, I don't know, performing something, for my brothers, for the school, for whatever idea I had of what I was supposed to be." He paused again. "But they're reasons, not excuses, and I think you know the difference." "I do," I said. "I think you've always known the difference." And then, quieter, "That's probably why it hit the way it did. You were never the person I told myself you were. You were just a person," I said. "Yeah, low, just a person." The city hummed below us. Somewhere nearby, a bird was arguing with itself in a tree. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, because it wasn't. And I'm not going to pretend I don't still feel parts of it sometimes. But I'm also not... I've stopped carrying it the way I was. I looked at the horizon. You humbled me in front of a whole school, Zane. And then I humbled myself in a different way by growing through it. And then you gestured at the space between us. Whatever this is. I think this is you humbling yourself. He was quiet for a long time. "That's more generous than I deserve," he said finally. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I'm going to university in September, and I don't want to take any of this with me. I want to arrive somewhere new without the weight of carrying all of you." He looked at me then. The first time in this conversation he'd fully looked at me, and it was the most unguarded expression I'd ever seen on his face. Not the half-smile, not the calculated stillness. Something young and genuinely regretful. "Good luck," he said, "at university, with the research, with everything." "Thanks," I said. He nodded, stood up from the railing, started toward the door, and then stopped. "He cares about you, you know," he said quietly. "Read. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." "I know," I said. "It wasn't about you," he said, when I talked to him that night. "It was about..." He stopped. "It was my problem, not yours. I want you to know that." I looked at him. "I know," I said again. "Tell him he's going to be remarkable. He's already starting to figure it out." Something crossed Zane's face, surprise, and then something softer than I'd ever seen there before. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He is." He went back through the door and down the stairs, and I turned back to the city. Solomon texted me that evening. "Confirmed I'm starting at Weston University in September. Where did you end up choosing?" I smiled at my phone. "Weston," I typed back. "Looks like we're going to the same place." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "That's... okay, that's actually great news. Do you want to get food this weekend? I know a good place near the Alderton offices. We could walk through the park after." I thought about Reed and the library and the playing fields path. I thought about how much I'd learned those past months, about what I needed from another person. He looked at me then. The first time in this conversation he'd fully looked at me, and it was the most unguarded expression I'd ever seen on his face. Not the half-smile, not the calculated stillness. Something young and genuinely regretful. "Good luck," he said, "at university, with the research, with everything. Thanks, I said. He nodded, stood up from the railing, started toward the door, and then stopped. He cares about you, he said quietly. Read. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. I know, I said. It wasn't about you, he said, when I talked to him that night. It was about... He stopped. It was my problem, not yours. I want you to know that. I looked at him. I know, I said again. Tell him he's going to be remarkable. He's already starting to figure it out. Something crossed Zane's face, surprise, and then something softer than I'd ever seen there before. Yeah, he said quietly. He is. He went back through the door and down the stairs, and I turned back to the city. Solomon texted me that evening. Confirmed I'm starting at Weston University in September. Where did you end up choosing? I smiled at my phone. Weston, I typed back. Looks like we're going to the same place. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. That's... Okay, that's actually great news. Do you want to get food this weekend? I know a good place near the Alderton offices. We could walk through the park after. I thought about Reed and the library and the playing fields path. I thought about how much I'd learned those past months, about what I needed from another person and what I refused to settle for. I thought about the roof and Zane and my mother's printed copy on the kitchen wall. I thought about Solomon Addo, tall and quiet and genuinely laughing, looking at me like I was wonderful without a single complication attached to it. Yes, I typed. Saturday works. Summer settled over the city like something finally exhaling. The weeks between the end of term and September had a particular quality, that last summer feeling where everything is ending and beginning simultaneously, and you can't quite decide which direction to face. I spent time with my mother. I worked on my research preliminary notes. I walked places slowly and looked at things. I ran into Reed once near the end of July in a bookshop in the city center. We were both reaching for the same shelf, which was the kind of thing that happens in stories and feels made up until it actually happens to you. Cal, he said, genuinely startled. Hey, I said. He looked better, I thought. Different in a small, important way. Lighter, like something he'd been holding had been set down. How's the summer? He asked. Good, I said honestly. Really good. You look... He stopped, started again. You look like yourself, he said carefully, like he was selecting the words, like the you that I always thought was there underneath everything. I think that person has been there for a while. I just had to stop carrying other people's opinions of him. He nodded. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at me the way he always had, fully, honestly, with all that complexity still there, but quieter now. I'm glad you're okay, he said quietly. I'm more than okay, I said. And I meant it. Is there... He hesitated. Is there someone? The someone you mentioned? I looked at him. Yeah, I said gently. There is. He nodded. A small exhale. Good, he said, and he genuinely meant it too. I could tell. He better be worth it. He is, I said. We stood in the bookshop with our separate books and the summer light coming through the window and all the things we'd been to each other existing quietly in the space between us, not gone, just changed, the way things change when they've served their purpose and left you different than they found you. Good luck at university, he said finally. You too, Reed. He smiled, the real one, the one he used for things that mattered, and then he took his book and walked to the other side of the shop, and I stood there for one moment before I went to pay for mine. September. Weston University, on a warm, golden, absolutely overwhelming first day. New campus, new people, new everything. And I stood at the entrance of the main building with my crutch and my bag and the slightly dizzy feeling of a person who has arrived somewhere after a very long journey. Solomon was already there. He was standing a little way off, looking at a campus map with the expression of someone who would never admit he was confused, but clearly was. And when he saw me, he raised a hand in a wave that somehow managed to be both casual and warm. "You made it," he said. Did you doubt me? I said. Never, he said easily. And then, gesturing at the map, do you know where the natural sciences quad is? Because this map is genuinely unhelpful. I laughed. Real. Full. The kind that happened without permission. I have no idea, I said, but I have time to figure it out. We stood in the September sun and figured out the map together. And the campus was enormous and confusing and full of people who didn't know my history, who hadn't seen any video, who had no idea about the courtyard or the fountain or any of it. I was just a student with a crutch and a fellowship, and the day was just a day. Except it wasn't just a day. It was the first one of something that felt like it was finally beginning in earnest. Here is what I know about being 19 years old and wolfless and mocked in front of your whole school. It stays with you. I won't pretend it just disappears. You still feel it sometimes. In the middle of an ordinary afternoon, this ghost of standing at that podium, the wrong podium, not the fellowship one, the one where you were just someone being laughed at. You feel it, and it's real, and it matters. But here is also what I know. You get to choose what you build on top of it. And if you build carefully, if you pour enough of yourself into the right things, eventually the foundation you lay is taller than what was done to you. Zane Hargrove stood on a roof and admitted something without anyone making him do it. Reed Hargrove stood up in an assembly hall full of people and clapped for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I stood at a real podium on my own terms and spoke about the thing that had been done to me and turned it into something that 400,000 people read. That is not nothing. That is the opposite of nothing. Solomon reached over one afternoon in October as we were studying at a table in the Weston Library. He touched the back of my hand, gently, the way Reed once had, but different because everything was different. And he said, "You're somewhere else today." "Just thinking about the year," I said. "Good year or bad year?" I considered. "Both," I said honestly. "The kind of year that makes you who you are." He looked at me with that look he had, the one where I was interesting and wonderful, with no history attached to it, just present, just now. "Tell me about it," he said. So I did. In pieces, over weeks, and then more completely, and then eventually all of it. Because that's what you do when you found the right person. You let them hold the whole story, not just the good parts. And Solomon held it carefully, the way you hold something valuable. He was warm and certain and there. And I, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, felt like exactly where I was standing was where I was supposed to be. Not because someone had finally given me permission to stand there. Not because I'd proven something to people who doubted me, though I had, but because I'd given myself permission, quietly, on a rooftop in an afternoon that had felt like nothing, but had actually been everything. The Triplet Mafia alphas mocked a crippled Omega before the whole school, and years later, he humbled them, yes, but more than that, he humbled himself into something greater than any of them had imagined for him. And he chose, in the end, not the one who'd had to fight his way to loving him, but the one who'd never needed convincing in the first place. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with revenge. This one ends with something better than either of those things. It ends with me, Callum Fade, standing in a university library in September sunlight, holding my own story, knowing every word of it, and being, finally, at peace. If this story moved you even a little, hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment below telling me which moment hit the hardest. I really do read every single one.